access to the information that we have available. So again, you see what my focus is going to be today: families, educators, and administrators. This is me, a little bit about myself. I know on the registration, you could click a little link and it shows you a little bit about me, but just gives you a little bit more information. And of course, you know, if I'm going to ask about you, if I'm going to tell you about me in a few minutes, I'm going to ask about you. But before we do that, I think it's important that we keep ourselves focused on the law of our land today. And I have been on many calls with the state and with the nationally. And the one thing I've continued to hear, you know, the Department of Ed, that even the state board say, the law of the land is still the law of the land, and that has not changed. So what I just want to share with you is that nothing at all that is said today during our time together is meant to circumvent or impede the law of the land, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, of course, ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act is the law of the land. Those four federal laws still are in place. They have not been amended due to anything that has been happening, and so we're all still, we must govern ourselves accordingly. But I also think it's important to say that most of you, if you've been watching the news conferences or watching your email feeds, ISB has provided guidelines and the governor's office have provided guidelines, and they almost can change by the minute sometimes. So I want to include in our first things first that this conversation we're having today, again, is not meant to impede or circumvent anything of the guidance that's coming from COVID-19 under ISB or the governor's office. And to that end, I just want to just share a couple of things. In our state, the official language that was used is stay at home. We've heard a lot of people saying shelter in place, quarantine, and even using the word, which I really hate, lockdown. But our official language, not only for this conversation today, but I hope you'll use it, especially when you're talking with families, is stay at home. Now, Governor did get a little pushback on that because we know that there are many in our society in Illinois who do not typically have the standard roof over their head, home, apartment, condominium that others have. So how can you really say stay at home? Nevertheless, that is the language that's in the executive order, and that is the language that we're using. The second important thing I want to just reflect upon is that Governor Pritzker and Superintendent Ayala have used the language about suspension of on-site instruction and not school closures or the shutting down of classes. So in Illinois, the premise is that schools are not closed. The learning has just shifted from on-site to remote, and that classes have not stopped. So from the time of the stay-at-home order and school began to shift from on-site to remote, there has been no school closures, therefore schools will not reopen and the fall classes will resume. And then that's my segue to the third one, is that for our language, Superintendent Ayala has been using remote learning as opposed to e-learning or virtual learning, because remote learning really reflects what has been happening across our state, as superintendents were given the flexibility to do remote learning by e-learning, physical packets, drop-offs, and a hybrid of some of those. So for our language today, we're going to be saying at home, stay at home, remote learning, and I'll be talking about when classes resume. And then secondly, the organizers asked each presenter to answer 2 questions and can put those questions within their slides. So you're looking at the first one: how will we address racial inequities in early childhood? And here's my response to that. I think anytime you can develop common language and understanding, you go a long way towards increasing equity and decreasing confusion. And then the second question they asked us to answer is the positive impacts that we think that this session will have today on inclusion. And so here it is. I think whenever you do, even if you don't agree, Common language and understanding is not saying it is an agreement. What it means is that whomever the community partners are, whoever all the stakeholders are within this system, have come together and found a working definition of like, this is what we're pointing towards, this is what our goal is going to be, this is what our mission is going to be, and we can all live with it. It's very much like the law. Very few laws that are on the books today, either whether locally, state, or federally, are the result of legislators and lobbyists and consultants such as myself completely agreeing on every single thing that's in the law. But what happens is we come together and you keep talking, you keep talking, and you keep talking until you can find a version that everyone can live with. And so for me, as we talk about the common language and understanding about social development, learning, and competency, what it does is it elevates the conversation so that community partners, businesses, families, educators, administrators, and in some cases, even students all understand what we're talking about when we say social emotional development, learning, and competency. And so I'm dating myself here. I don't know how many of you will remember the romper room lady, but I certainly do. And this picture is just my way of just reiterating what Ruby said. You all can see me. I cannot see you. So that's really different from if we had have been together face to face. You know, I'd be saying, oh, hi, you know, so and so, I haven't seen you in so long. And you'd be saying, oh, yeah, Dr. Taylor, I'm, you know, so happy to see you again. We're unable to do that. So I cannot see you, very much like the romper room lady. She was just talking out there with the belief that there were those watching. So I cannot see you, obviously. Can't see the responses, can't see the hands raised. I'm so grateful for Ruby, the very able-bodied Ruby, who's going to be doing that for me. And I certainly am deferring to her expertise as we start communicating with each other through the chat. She will just read through them and share out as she feels that it's appropriate to do so. But I also just want us to give ourselves some grammar grace. You know, when you're trying to type in the chat, especially for this session, I was told that 200 people registered. You know, if you're like me, your PhD or your professional brain starts interfering with what you want to type. Did I put my comma in there, my semicolon? You know, did I spell check that right? We are giving ourselves some grammar grace when we open up the chat for a question. Just get it in there. No, this is a no judgment zone, hashtag no judgment. If it's not spelled correctly or every semicolon or colon or period isn't there, that is just fine. Our goal today is to just be able to enjoy our time together, have as much interaction with each other as possible, because you are really seeking and sharing wisdom from each other, as well as you're seeking and sharing wisdom from me. And so to that end, I do want you to screenshot this right here. That is my website. You can contact me directly through my website. Once it makes sure that you are not a robot, anything that comes to my website, under my website, there's a tab that says contact, and it comes directly through me. Again, once you prove you're not a robot, it comes directly to me, actually to my email and to my phone. So after today, if there's any unanswered questions you have, clarifying questions, wondering, missed chat response, or etc., please feel free to contact me through my website, and I will do the very best I can to make sure that I respond to you and get back with your unanswered questions, clarifying questions, and wondering are those things like, you know what? When she talked about XYZ, that made me wonder about so-and-so. Or I was wondering if we were going to talk about ABC, and she didn't, but I see a connection to the presentation, so I want to reach out to Dr. Taylor about that. Anything at all, you can reach me through my website, and like I said, I will be sure to get back in touch with you. So now, here's our first chat. Who is who? And that is family member, and I do wonder if there are any family members here. And I don't mean like you're a family member who is also a teacher. I just mean you're straight out. Somehow you found out about this and you wanted to just be a part of the conversation. It put in the chat if you are a family engagement specialist, And there's many names for that. You might be called in your district or within your system, family engagement liaison, coordinator support. Put that in. If you're an educator, put that in the chat and then be specific. Is it pre-K, kindergarten, or up? Administrator, and then of course other. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that, or a minute to do that. And then Ruby, as you just share out what's popping up.
Sure. So we have family engagement, toddler teacher, early literacy librarian, administrator, pre-K teacher, early childhood consultant and trainer, pre-K teacher, parent-child educator, Head Start teacher, coordinator for early childhood collaborative, family engagement manager, INCRA staff, primary school administrator, family support worker for McVie, family support worker, family child care provider, nonprofit literacy partner, home visitor supervisor, out of school time teacher at CBO, educators, coordinators, family engagement, teacher, pre-K.
All right, lots of family engagement on here. And shout out to INCRA. If that's Jody or anybody from her team, just tell her that Dr. Taylor said hello. We usually are about 4 times a year. Jody is a part of the Early Childhood Least Restrictive Environment Consortium, and we usually have our meetings at INCRA. The last 2, of course, were not, but I usually see her at least 4 times a year. So shout out to INCRA, and shout out and welcome to all of you who are on today. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to jump right in with a multiple choice question. So just hold off until you see the final choice. I just want to get a pulse check. How do you feel about the last quarter of this school year / fiscal year? So you know the fiscal year starts from July 1st and goes to June 30th. And typically we say that is the academic year as well. The academic year starts at July 1st and ends on June 30th. So just wanted to know, what is your pulse check on the last quarter of this school year / fiscal year? Is it A, B, C, D, E, or all of the above? Go ahead and type your letter in the chat.
Dr. Taylor, I think some of those skipped. Oh, okay. That's fine then.
Do you want me to go back?
That might be useful. Maybe it skipped for other people too.
Okay, so this is A. This is B. This is C. This is D. E. And F is all of the above. And you can just type your letter in, A, B, C, D, E, or F.
I'm seeing
So Ruby, what are you seeing? A majority of Fs?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if we were going to extend this, we might say all of the above, all of the time, all at once. So you might have the emotion to go from like, you know what, I got this, I got this, I got this, to what? What do you mean the stay-at-home order is going to be extended? To this is just too much, to, you know what, I am not feeling this at all. I feel like I maybe even be a little bit angry. You still might be in that state of like, do we even believe what is happening? Do we even believe what's happening? And then my favorite one is that one at the end where it's like, and you know what, when it's all said and done, the combination of all of these emotions, I'm feeling a little bit loopy. And who wouldn't be under these circumstances? But I'm going to ask us to just take that and then let's flip the switch a little bit and think about the fact that 75% of this past school year and fiscal year most likely went as planned. In our school system, 75% of the school year took place on site. We were with our students. We were engaging with families, having our PLCs. If you were a community-based organization, your little babies were there. Whatever your specialty was, 75% of this fiscal year and school year took place as planned. So I want to ask you, when you look at this graphic, and I started to just put the number 75 and 25 up, but then I thought, a graphic sometimes can really bring the message home. When you look at this, how does that resonate with you? Does it allow you to kind of shift our perspective on evidence-based practices, shift our perspective on the totality of this year? Go ahead and put that in the chat. And as you're doing that, I'm just going to share a little bit. So I'll put that in the chat, and then Ruby, I'll of course want to give you some time to share out. But that 25%, it has been bossing that 75% around. It really has. It's intense. I mean, very intense. And it seems like with each increasing event that happens, that 25% gets a little bit more intense. But the 75%, as you know, remember when we were in school, 25% is less than 75%. There is a real truth to that. And so I want us to collectively not let that 25% boss that 75% around. And for those of you that have made it this far, if you have not pat yourself on the back yet, you need to be doing it, because you took the evidence-based practices that you know, the things that you had in place from the 75%, and you have used that to manage and engage the 25%, even though you were feeling like this. So Ruby, did anybody give a resonating thought when they look at that?
Shifts my perspective. So this helps shift somebody's perspective. Yes.
Yeah, because we need to be empowered, particularly because we do not know, as classes resume for the fall, there's still some unknown variables. So what we can do is, clearly there's a lot that we can learn from this 25%, but we're going to take that shift on our perspective and use that to empower us to make informed, cautious decisions as we move forward. Doing what? Community collaborations. I do want to thank Grace Araya for this slide. This is courtesy of Grace and Partner Plan Act. So this is what cross systems look like. And then this early childhood system, you see all of these moving parts here. And all of these moving parts are all working their way towards helping children and families be able to thrive. That is very similar to the whole school, whole child, whole community. And in fact, that whole school, whole child, whole community launched in 2007. And here's a statement from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And there's a lot of resurgence that have come up from whole school, whole community, whole child, specifically around this particular quote, because now more than ever, we're finding out what it looks like when these systems do work together whenever possible, and when they do not work together whenever possible, how we literally can lose children and families and just even our own practices. This is a quote that I love. It's from an unknown author. I've not been able to find out who the author is, but I love this because certainly when you're bringing together community partners, especially if you really think about the community system, it's probably something that's growing. And until you reach those concrete definitions that everybody agrees on, sometimes that vision can get a little bit blurry, but the team decides to keep going towards what we hope is that common vision and working towards it. And then this is one of my favorite sayings. Coming together does not mean that we forget who we are. Equity doesn't mean that we forget who we are. We're not asking anyone to lay down, everybody's got DCFS, community-based organizations, Head Start, businesses. Everyone comes with their lens and their discipline. And sometimes if it's a funding stream, such as a grant, you have things that you must do it to be compliant. coming together as a team doesn't necessarily mean that you're foregoing all of that. What it means is that we celebrate our uniquenesses and we still try to work towards common language to meet expectations that have been agreed upon. So to that end, our conversation today is going to focus around enhancing and aligned standards. So you see that's on that outer part of that rim there. But I truly believe that if we can focus on that and get to come to some type of understanding there, it will impact each and every one of these interacting and interdependent and independent and interrelated parts that will help children and families thrive. So just want to share with you, this is what we're focusing on today, enhancing and aligning standards. So to that end, when you think about social emotional development, learning, and competency, when you think about that, when you hear about it, what do you think about? Go ahead and put that in the chat.
Dr. Taylor, I also want to let you know that if somebody wants to actually speak, they can raise their hands and I can unmute them too if they want, if they have something more
I,
to say.
I'm perfectly okay with that, and I will defer to you if that's okay with you. And we still want people to chat because we are going to capture these, but it is nice to be able, again, to have this be as interactive as possible. So what do you think when you think of that social emotional development, learning, and company? And really what I want, like, what's the first thing that usually that comes to your mind when you hear that phrase or you see that?
You see emotional intelligence, interactions, foundation, play, socialization, meeting people where they are,
Love it.
emotional health. Yeah.
Love it. That emotional health. And of course, again, our aligned standards is not necessarily talking about social emotional development from a mental perspective, although as we address it according to our learning standards and align our standards, you certainly can see where one can impact the other. And from a community system standpoint, how our mental health coordinators, especially now, can get involved in the conversation. So for me, I just wanted to be explicit in saying that social emotional development is not necessarily a conversation about challenging behavior. And a lot of times you'll hear people, oh yeah, social emotional, that's challenging behavior. We've got to deal with this challenging behavior. But that's not necessarily the totality or even a small bit of social emotional development, learning, and competency as it relates to our standards. We've also heard a lot of people, and as a consultant, I've heard a lot of people say, you know what, our schools are really going to have to be ready for when students return to face-to-face instruction, because I think we're going to see so much challenging behavior based off of the trauma that has impacted so many of us in our society today. And I don't disagree with that, but I also want us to be so mindful of the fact that the lived experience means that the same event is usually experienced differently by everyone, adults, children, families, and even within the same family. The lived experience can be experienced differently. So what we don't want to do is just lump everything into challenging behavior or even lump a conversation into how trauma is going to impact. And these, what you're looking at now, are just some of the trauma-informed conversations that have surfaced and been gone about through this time. And as you even look at this, you see each of these trauma-informed conversations are all speaking about something a little bit differently. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Fight, flight, or flight, friends, freeze, forget. Fight, flight, freeze, flop, befriend. Everybody kind of comes at it from a different way. And the reason why is because, again, the lived experience, we don't know how people are going to be impacted by trauma. But we do know that it is agreed upon National Childhood Center for Pyramid Model Interventions. They have this great article, it's called The Teaching Pyramid. And they have determined that in any typical classroom setting, whether it's community-based, Head Start, pre-K, kindergarten, there's about 4% of the children in the classroom that would exhibit challenging behavior. And even if we were to say, well, due to COVID-19, we really need to be aware because that amount could increase. Even if we tripled that to 12%, that would still mean that 88% of the children who are going to be in our midst would not be experiencing challenging behavior in response to trauma. It could be somewhere even in here. So if anything we need to do, we need to be differentiating our practice based off of this right here and really doing that through our standards, our evidence-based practices. So what do you mean when we say social emotional development, learning, and competency? Here's our common language for today. This is how I am defining development for our conversation today. Here's how I'm defining learning. And here's how I'm defining competency. Now, when you take this information and use it out across your settings, your team or your community partner may come up with different definitions for development, learning, and competency. But for our conversation today, here's the specifics of that. And the reason I think it's important to do that is because we're having a lot of conversations about equity. And in fact, kudos to Dr. Ayala. Last year, after she was appointed to be the superintendent for our state, she had a lot of meetings, and I was blessed to be in some of those meetings. And she was talking about equity way back in July of 2019. Equity needs to be our framework. So we already had the word about equity and the conversation about equity, but here's the problem. It's undefined in our state. We do not have an official definition of equity in our state. Neither do we have an official definition of kindergarten readiness. So if you read through the, for the virtual, when you click the link and you're registering, Grace and her team, they did a great job of talking about the purpose of talking about equity and how we're preparing our families and our children to be ready for kindergarten. But in Illinois, it has not been defined. And so when the language is not common and is not truly defined, it makes it difficult to understand and it makes it harder to reach your target. So for us, I wanted us to really be able to reach our target about development, learning, and competency. So how do we get there? We're going to use our standard. Because the law of the land is still ESSA, that also means the law of the land in Illinois is the Illinois School Code. And in Illinois, all learning is focused on standards. And here we are, the Illinois Early Learning Guidelines, IELDS, and the new Illinois Learning Standards. So the Illinois Early Learning Guidelines from birth to age 3. Illinois Early Learning and Development Standard is literally stated children ages 3 to kindergarten enrollment age. And so already there, if we are aware of that, when we're talking about children that are in our pre-K programs, and whether it's preschool for all, PFA, or preschool for all expansion, PFAE, whether it's state or federal, if you are true to those standards, you are already preparing children for kindergarten enrollment because literally the standards are linked. And I just real quick want to, if you already knew and had read through the standards that the pre-K standards literally
Dr. Taylor, we seem to have lost you. We can't see you or hear you. I just sent you a webcam request. Okay, please stand by, everyone. I think Dr. Taylor is trying to reboot.
Hello, everyone. This is Grace Araya, the Director of Community Systems Statewide Supports here at Illinois Action for Children. And so while Ruby is assisting Antoinette to get back on, maybe what we can do is, I know this is an area that's really become really important. It's always been important, social emotional development, but I know with COVID and things that are happening in our nation, so maybe we can just share what are things that you all are seeing, or what are things that you're struggling with in this area, or what you've seen that's been helpful. If you raise your hand, Ruby can unmute you and you can share, or you can put something into the chat box while we work on getting Antoinette back in. Dr. Taylor. I saw a comment earlier from Diana that said children may love that they get to stay home with their parents and they will be better socially developed because of the relationships formed with their family. That is definitely something we've been seeing, where everyone has gotten more time to spend with family, and so that is an upside to some of this. Christina says that she's concerned for only children who are more isolated from other kids now, right? So then, right, that's also another perspective there. And then Janet commented, yes, especially when parents are working from home and may not be able to give them the attention they need. Certainly that's been a struggle, trying to maintain work as well as spending time with children, but then also helping them with schoolwork. So we have heard that a lot as well from families, that it's been stressful to kind of maintain all those responsibilities. This is a question maybe posed to some of you that are working directly with families. Curious to know if parents have been able to use the various learning, social, emotional learning tools that have been shared. Are activities more powerful than others? So what are you all seeing in terms of what's been really being able to support families? So Janine said she's been thinking a lot about social emotional support when kids get back to school or childcare. I think the transition back for our youngest kiddos may be more difficult, and I just wonder what supports we are putting in place to prepare and support staff. That's right. We know transitions can be difficult for children. We know even during the regular school year, just from a long weekend coming back can be difficult. And so now having had this very long time away,
Okay, can
getting
you
back.
hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so can you see my screen?
No.
Okay, thank you guys for hanging in there with us as we try to figure this out.
No problem. Antoinette, while you get your screen up, I'm just going to go ahead and share what's been in the chat, and then once you have your screen up, I'll hand it back to you. So Valerie's
Thank
saying
you.
she's
So Ruby, what
concerned.
do we do?
Valerie says she's concerned, or the collaborative is concerned and worried about what social emotional supports will be in place to help children. Oops, jump back up. To help children and families cope with trauma. Some have said that the Sesame Street activities that have been offered through Sesame Street have been really helpful. And our other presenter
Okay,
mentioned that as
great.
well.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Grace,
and your screen. Thank you, Antoinette.
No, thank you. Thank you, Grace, for pinch hitting there. And thank you, Ruby. And thank you all for staying on. I'm just going to jump right in and keep going. I don't know if you can see me or not. If you can't, I apologize for that, but I don't want to go back and try to do anything different. So I'm just going to keep going, and Ruby will let me know if she doesn't hear me, okay? So now you're looking at the new Illinois Learning Kindergarten Standards, which is important. We were just talking about that. And now I want to just ask you, what do you think of, and this is going to be something you can put in the chat. And I just want to go back. We were talking about the Illinois Early Learning and Development Standards, and I really like to talk about this because so many times people do not realize that when ISB worked with the team to create these standards, they literally made them touch kindergarten. And so as you ever go through them, right at the bottom of each page where an Illinois Early Learning and Development Standard is connected to a kindergarten standard for Illinois, it does tell you that. So again, that's kind of an alignment conversation. And so now I would ask us, if you think about the Illinois Early Learning Guidelines, IELDS, and the new Illinois Learning Kindergarten Standard, just take a guesstimate, how many times is self-regulation mentioned in the social emotional learning standards combined? So give me a number that would combine IELG, IELDS, and new Illinois learning standards. And you'd say, oh, self-regulation as it relates to social emotional learning standards, I'd say it's probably mentioned, and you fill in the blank, 5 times, 3 times, or it's related to the totality of four of those social emotional learning standards. And then I'll wait for Ruby or Grace to tell me what you see.
Somebody said 100, or another person said 10.
10, okay, 100. Yeah, because if we're combining, right, between the Illinois Early Learning Guidelines and the IELDS and the new Illinois Learning Standards for kindergarten, you think that it will be way up there. Any other numbers, Grace or Ruby?
Yes, we have 15, 25. Somebody said it's got to be really high. 50.
Okay, let's stop there at the really high. Guess what the answer is? 0. In Illinois, within the Illinois Early Learning Guidelines, Illinois Early Learning and Development Standards, and new Illinois Learning Standards, self-regulation is 0 social emotional learning standards. In fact, in Illinois, here's how we define it. And it is only in the Illinois Early Learning Guidelines, but it is in the Illinois Early Learning Guidelines as its own domain. It is not related to the domain of social emotional learning, development, and competency. Here's what it looks like in the Illinois Early Learning Guidelines. And then, believe it or not, it's skips in Illinois all the way to the kindergarten individual development survey. And then even then, self-regulation is not connected to social emotional learning. It is connected to approaches to learning.
Dr. Taylor, I just want to share
Yes.
that some people seem really surprised by that. And Barbie Curran shared, you need those skills to be able to learn in other areas. So I think that's really key point. And then somebody else said, I'm not surprised.
So, and this is the whole conversation about aligning and having that common language, right? Usually when I tell people this, oh, what do you mean self-regulation? Because when you hear people talk about challenging behavior, the next sentence that usually comes out of their mouth, yeah, because self-regulation, if kids are not able to self-regulate, then they're not going to be able to learn anything. And they connect that to the standards. But in Illinois, self-regulation is not connected to a social emotional learning standard. It's like, I forget the name of the person you said, Grace. It's the totality of everything, not just social emotional learning. It is the totality. Look at 4 on the kids domain. Shared use of space and materials, engaging, attending. And I want to go back to this Illinois Early Learning Guideline. Attention regulation is not like kids wanting attention. It really is how they focus, how they attend, not only to their own specific small world that's around them, but the entire environment that is around them. So to me, self-regulation, it undergirds so much. But if we're talking about common knowledge and understanding about the standards and aligning them, in Illinois, self-regulation, it is not a goal, a benchmark, or descriptor of our IELG, New Illinois Learning Standards, or our Illinois Early Learning and Development Standards. And I just real quick want to go back to that definition and see how we can differentiate our practice or even our conversations around all of these things if we look at this definition, and how we know that it will weave and dodge in and out across all of our children's developmental domains. Self-regulation has the ability to do that. So then I just want to real quick talk about the standards. Look at this child here. And this is a conversation about equity. And I again, you can't see me, but if you could see me, you would see my very serious, like, yes, we need to have this conversation face. So here's a child, and I'm a consultant, so I travel all over the state, all over the country, and I consult and I present. And I am sharing with you now something that I literally experienced as a consultant, really more than once. So I want you to look at this child right here, and think of this as a classroom and a learning center. Clearly, this child is in distress, right? I want you now to look at the picture on your left of this easel. You don't see any paint, you don't see any paintbrushes, anything. A few years ago, I was consulting for a district. I had a plethora of action items they had given me within my contract. And one of them was just really helping teachers be able to engage the environment, engage all of the children in their environment, and thinking about that challenging behavior according to the teaching pyramid, which comes from the National Center on Pyramid Model Interventions and Innovations. Typically in any classroom setting, in any program, in any school, the amount of children that exhibit true challenging behavior that require individualized, intensive support is at 4%. So that means 96% of our children in our programs and in our schools fall somewhere else in between. So in this classroom I was observing, I saw this, the child on the right. I also saw a child standing at an easel. It was during choice time, and for those of you who don't know, choice is that time where it's supposed to be 60 minutes of uninterrupted independent learning for the child, where the teacher is engaging with children throughout the environment for one-on-one conversations, group settings, really interacting with children. I sat and watched a child who wanted to paint. The problem was there was no paint out on the easel. There were no paint brushes. And I am telling you, The child sat there and kind of walked around the easel, looked around the classroom, and you might guess where all of the tension was in that classroom by the adults and, quite frankly, a lot of the other students. It was on the student at the right. But here's that conversation about equity. Neither one of these children were able to appropriately communicate and express their needs, wants, and feelings. Yet the child that was on the right was getting everything, and the child who was standing in front, and this is honest to God, I will not say obviously the name where I was to protect the names of the innocent, wandered around and looked around, never went to any adult and said, I would like to paint. Can I have some paint? If I can't paint, what else can I do? So when we think about our standards, it helps us align and make sure that there is equity in the fact that regardless of the moment and time, we are focused on our evidence-based practices, and we make sure that every child and their family has an opportunity to learn and understand these standards. And what is our goal as we're teaching, as I'm planning? Have I talked about it with families? And this is just, when I saw this, I thought, okay, I'm going to use that. So I wanted to stop. And again, we may not get through all of this because of the technical difficulties we have, but I think it's important to stop and have a conversation about this. So just go ahead and chat, put in the chat if you've ever experienced this, what your thoughts are about this, how this resonates with you, and then I'll rely on Grace and Ruby to share, or even open up the conversation and unmute if something pops out that's like, yeah, we really should all hear that. So go ahead when you see this. What is it? How does it resonate with you?
Someone said that this is an excellent explanation of equity. Again, if it would be easier for you to share out loud, I can definitely unmute you. You just have to raise your hand. Okay, we have Maribel Rivera Lopez. So now, Maribel, for you to speak, you have to also unmute yourself. There we go.
Okay, I could relate to that when a child gets very upset. We have to make sure that we try to listen to what they're doing or saying, and then try to have a little bit of empathy.
Absolutely. And then Ruby, Maribel, I would say, how would you take that same trend, what you just said, and shift it to that child? Because I'm telling you, and I'm observing this, right? I'm the consultant, so I'm observing, I'm the fly on the wall. The child that was looking for the paint for 60 minutes never cried, never stomped his foot, never anything. He just kind of sat there.
Right.
Because now, had he knocked that easel over, we know we would have gotten some attention, right?
Right,
But
right.
what? How do we take that same? And of course, when a child is exhibiting behavior that they're in duress, of course we want to attend to that. But the totality of equity means we're trying to have a system in place where no one is neglected. And for me, if I look at this, the child that was marginalized was probably the child that sat by that easel, kind of looked around, never got what he wanted, and then for 60 minutes never had an opportunity to be redirected anywhere else. So could you, Maribel, transition what you just said to that baby that was standing at that easel and never got to put one drop of paint on the paper?
Well, that's why in an aspect I could see is that as teachers, we have to be attentive to all the kids in our surroundings. Because once we do that, we're able to direct or give the child language and skills to be able to say, I need some paint sticks.
Okay, Mirabelle, you and I are now best friends on Facebook and Instagram or whatever, whatever the social. And thanks so much, Mirabelle, for sharing, because you just said use your words. Now, this what we're looking at here is a social, emotional, and development benchmark. How often do we hear teachers say, use your words, use your words? If we take this benchmark, which is social and emotional, and pair that, and you guys can't see, but I have my little trusty IELDS book here. And had we been in person, I would have been passing this around, because one of the one of the standards for language and literacy says a child will be able to express and give age appropriate communication. So there, right now, we're seeing how we can align social emotional development, learning, and competency with other parts of our standards and have full conversations about it. So when you tell a child use your words, have you taught them how to use their words? Have we communicated that with families? Do we need to do some professional development around about it? Do we think about that as it comes to our community partners? So thank you so much, Maribel. You took me right into the segue of my next part here. And I am watching my time. I'm watching my time and trying not to go too fast at the same time. So now let's talk about families. Remember, my descriptor was when we do this for families, educators, and administrators, we can increase our practice and increase outcomes for children. So I just want to share a couple of resources with you for families. Illinois Family and School Success. And this is in your handout, but I just want you to see the family engagement framework is a part of this. Legislative references, resources, webinars, great tool to use to connect with families. Here is kind of how the ISB family engagement framework is set up. Right there, learning at home visitors. And I again say, as a consultant, a lot of the feedback that I was getting as I was consulting with districts and programs during that 25% of this naughty, you might say, part of this fiscal year or school year, families were really pushing back saying, wait a minute, I am overwhelmed. This is too much. You know, I'm not prepared for this. And the last thing we want to do is make a family member feel like they are not an equal, equitable partner and the stakeholder of anything that we're doing. So in your handouts, I've given you some things like learning standards start at home, some real simple things you can do to break down, but more importantly, to use a family engagement framework and your conversation with families, just to say, when we do this in the classroom, here's how the impact we hope it has on your child. Here's how you can partner with us on this at home and give families that understanding, and you can really break it down for them. You don't always have to have a lot. We could just simply go back to that one benchmark that I just showed you, and you could do a whole conversation with families around that. I'm gonna shorten this one a little bit, and I'm just gonna ask you, raise your hand if within your frame of work you have ever used a family engagement, the Illinois State Board of Education family engagement as a resource, either to connect to families or just in your own work, either as PLC, you've done some in-services around unpacking that and having conversations about it. Just raise your hand if you have. And I'm trying to adjust a little bit here for time. So Grace and Ruby, what are we seeing?
You see about 15 raised hands?
So there's a strategy right there. We're going to take, because we're talking about families, and if standards start at home, and we want our families to know that they are equitable, cherished members of whatever our partnership is going to be, we want to make sure that we're engaging with them. And sometimes to do that at the home or at the family level, you have to start doing it within the school system, so that people can see and know how we're going to engage families. And we don't want to just assume that teachers understand how to do that or families understand how to do that. So thank you for those of you that put your hands up. I also want to just bring to your attention the federal side of this, the dual capacity framework. It is really, really good. They just recently came out with a 2.0 version that focuses on these things, the challenge to really engage and have partnership, the essential conditions, policy and programs, and capacity outcomes. So now we're going to start trying to have some conversations. How will you use the guidelines and standards to engage, parentheses, partner, plan, and act with families to develop common language and understanding about social emotional development, learning, and competency? You can put it in the chat, and then I'll trust Ruby and Grace to unmute someone if they see something that we really want to share out. We've got about 24 more minutes, so we might just want to, you guys might just want to pull one thing out of the chat, and then we'll continue on.
Nothing is coming up quite yet. Maybe somebody's typing.
And Grace, you can still hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, very good.
Okay, we have, I will use the guidelines tracking tool of a child emotional development with the family.
And one thing about this is that, of course, when this first came out, we had all these hard copies, but now it's all online, and you do have the links to the IELG. And remember that IELG, it's birth to 36 months, and the IELDS is 3 to kindergarten enrollment. And then, of course, the kindergarten is throughout kindergarten, as well as where children are when we first meet them and where we want them to be at the end of their time with us. So you can see how each one overlaps with the other. If you're doing a home visit, you can pull it up right on your phone, show a family how to get to that so that they can literally see what you're talking about. And then as far as planning with partnerships and community systems, you can pull those right out, and literally you can work your way backwards even. If you come up with your own definition of kindergarten readiness, you could literally say, okay, if we want the children in our community or our partnership to look like this and be able to be ready for kindergarten in this way, you could start at one of those kindergarten standards, look at those kids' domains, and then work your way backward, connecting standard to guideline. You don't have to use them all. There's a temptation to use them all, but you don't necessarily need to do that. Pick one, let that one be your focus, and then as you progress in that one, then you can add others. So I want to talk about educators and the importance of having common language. And I'm calling this the crying over spilt milk. Literally, again, a consulting experience I had. This was in a district, and they were literally wanting to align their pre-K to kindergarten practices. And one of the things that they were dealing with is that the kindergarten team was really at odds with the preschool team, because the kindergarten team basically said children are coming to kindergarten and they are not ready. And so we want to know, what have those preschool teachers been doing? So quite naturally, the preschool teachers went on defense. You know, what do they mean? We're working just as hard as they are. You know, they're saying that because we have play-based learning, and they think all we do all day long is play. You know, and they were seriously at odds with each other. So once I started investigating and finding out, well, what is the problem? What is it that the children are not ready to learn? What is it that they're not able to do in kindergarten, where preschool teachers are saying they are completely ready? If they've been with us, they should be ready to go. And here is what it boiled down to. In kindergarten, when they go into the cafegimatorium or wherever it is, when children eat their lunch, it is very different from a typical preschool for all or preschool for all expansion experience. If it is a preschool for all program that is half day, children are coming in the morning. They are doing what we call a snack as center. So just throughout their choice time, if they want a snack, a carrot or something like that, they go get it. Teachers are communicating with them throughout. If it is a full day preschool for all program or full day preschool for all expansion program, part of the requirements under ECHRS 3 and the grant is that literally ECHRS 3 says every moment a child is awake, it is a moment that they should be learning. So for preschool, when children are sitting down, say if they're eating lunch or even if they're doing snack as center, teachers are engaging with them. Oh, John Doe, I see we have meatloaf today. Do you like meatloaf? Meatloaf is one of my favorite meals. Oh, you're putting ketchup on yours. Having a whole conversation and interacting with the children. And as they're doing that, they're opening up the milk and opening up the spork, all of those things. Well, in kindergarten, that does not happen. Children line up, they go in the class, they go from the classroom to the cafegimatorium, so to speak. Their lunch is put on a tray. They sit down and they eat. They have so many minutes to do it because there's another group coming right in behind them. And as a result, some of the children that had transitioned from preschool to kindergarten, they were literally crying over spilt milk because what was happening? Teachers were taking it. It was time to go. And they were throwing out the food. Now, I know that sounds terrible, but there was no such thing as take it back to class and you can eat it with you. So some children were melting down. They were crying because they were hungry. You had children that had half-day programs that are now in a full-day kindergarten. So not only are they adjusting to half-day to full day, you mean to tell me you took my lunch from me? Nobody asked me if I like meatloaf. Nobody asked me if I like, where was the conversation? And what had happened is it disrupted the entire afternoon of the kindergarten teachers. Hence, they surmise children are not ready for kindergarten. When the true problem was this district had not had any type of articulation, agreement, or conversation between preschool and kindergarten. What are the expectations when we send them off to you? Here's what we're sending here as a sending teacher. Here I am as a receiving teacher. This is important to us. And of course, how could the teacher teach when you have children that are crying, children that are some exhibiting challenging behavior? Families are upset because they're coming. My baby said that they threw his food away. My baby came home hungry. Families got all involved. So you see how important it is to have that common language and common understanding about everything. Leave no stone unturned. Don't ever assume that anybody within your partnership, and this was within the same district, another district that I consulted for last summer, it was a particular school. Actually, this was not a district, this was a principal. She asked me to come in and we did a full alignment summer from pre-K all the way up to grade 6, because she realized that the teams had never sat down and talked about, well, what do you do in your classroom? Education, we go in our programs, we go in our classrooms, we go in our buildings, we close the doors, and then we come out at the end of the day. So we can be very, very siloed in our approaches. So for this particular classroom, this building I was at last year consulting, we literally took the time to break down the standards, the curriculum, the preschool curriculum, the curriculum they were using for middle school, the curriculum they were using for first, second, and third grade, every assessment that they were using, NWEA, kids, they used Teaching Strategies Gold, and we literally from pre-K to 6th grade aligned everything. They mapped the entire curriculum, including IEP meetings, all of that for an entire summer. And it just made a difference this whole year. So I know you have a slide there that says, how will you use? And instead of going in the chat now so that we can move on, because I do need to hand you back off to Grace and Ruby for some housekeeping for the remainder of the summit. Instead of putting in the chat, I'm going to ask you to look at this question and then start your strategic plan, even if it's mentally, of how you can do this work to partner, plan, and act with educators around social emotional development, learning, and competency. And remember, our focus on that graphic is aligning standards, aligning those standards. And then finally, administrators, and we do have some administrators on today. Your role is a little bit different, right? You all are kind of the, as they say, the eagle eye view. At the same time, you have to engage families. You're trying to engage your teachers, and you're working with your teachers. And so really administrators have quite a charge when it comes to how we align, how we're going to address, how we're going to bring in the community, how we're going to bring in our family. And you see this, when you think about families, equity, families come to us in all ways. Sometimes grandma and grandpa are second or third parents. Sometimes it's two dads, two moms, mom, single dad, very young family member, right? It could be a young mom, a young father. So really the administrator is trying to pull everything together, and you're putting your head together with other administrators, and you're certainly trying to help families and teachers come to the table as equal partners. So again, I'm not going to do the chat here. And Ruby and Grace, if you're seeing anything that does come up in the chat, please feel free to halt me. But I'm taking you back to what my descriptor was. If families, educators, and administrators know, if we remind ourselves to focus and the evidence-based practice of our standards, we can literally help our families, help teachers, help each other, administrators from one building to the next, administrators including superintendents, administrators including reaching out to your Head Start programs that are around you, your community-based organizations that are around you. And Head Start framework is very complete, synthesizing those things, doing it on purpose. The strategy really is talking to each other, communicating with each other, being sure that once you've got that communication plan and you say, that when we say social emotional development and competency, we mean this. Here is our target, this standard, this guideline. We see how they touch each other. Here's how we're going to teach around it. Here's how we're going to talk about it. Here's how we are going to have professional learning around it. Here's how we're going to have in-services around it. And I don't even have a slide in here about here's how we're going to talk to children about it. And then as Maribel said, listen to the children and let them talk to us about it. Will be you'll go such a long way in moving your community collaborations forward. You're thinking about those community collaborations who don't typically sit at the table. I am the chairperson of the Illinois Attendance Commission, and we early on had some conversations about who are all the stakeholders that need to be involved if we're talking about attendance and chronic absenteeism, which under ESSA and the law is excused and unexcused absences at any point in time when children are supposed to be in school. We realized that we needed to have a conversation with the American Association of Pediatrics. Because do you think they're sitting up thinking about chronic absenteeism? No, that's not their discipline. So nationally, we started having conversations with the American Association of Pediatrics and then even with Illinois. And ESSA was 2015. Just last year, the American Association of Pediatrics came out with some statements around how to engage pediatricians when it comes to having conversations about school attendance to support families and partner with the academic institutions. So when you think about community collaboration, that one strategy is to never think that somebody sitting next to you knows, well, she's a teacher, she has to know. How many of us said, gosh, we were saying, well, self-regulation, it must be in there 100 times, or it must be in there a lot of times. It's not a social, emotional, or learning goal or guideline. Is it a conversation? Yes, self-regulation is. but not attached to the social emotional development and learning standards. So if we don't know that as the educators, certainly we have to make sure that anybody that's a part of our community system or may come to it understands. And there
Dr.
it is
Taylor,
again, enhancing. Yes, ma'am.
there is one comment that I wanted to point out that was said a little earlier. This was Rhonda Hillier. She said, I struggle with the term children ready for kindergarten. There is a balance. There is a balance. Schools need to be ready for children as well. So I think that speaks well to everything that you're talking about now.
And who said that, Grace? Or is this Ruby or Grace? I'm sorry, I
It's
can't
Ruby.
see.
It's
Oh,
Ruby.
so who said
Rhonda
that,
said that.
Ruby?
Rhonda.
Ron, okay, Rhonda, you are my Maribel. You and I, we're just going to have to be three's company because now Rhonda is my second BFF on Facebook and Instagram. Because surely, if we're going to have conversation equity, right? We want children to be ready for kindergarten. Then we need kindergarten to be ready for children. And how do we get there? We get there by having that conversation. And to be honest, the two examples I gave you all of what I experienced as a consultant, and I really, this one was a district, the superintendent actually said, you know what, Antoinette, I've looked over our records and we've never really even done any joint PD. We've never even had the conversation about what this looks like for us to transition children from pre-K to kindergarten. And for the school that I consulted with last year, they literally were right down the hall from each other and had never sat down and talked. So that's such a great thing to say. And that's not even just kindergarten. As we think about early Head Start to Head Start to kindergarten, kindergarten up, we've got what they said. We must work together across spectrum outside of our doors if we want things to have equitable outcomes for children. I want you guys to think about Brockenbrenner's theory. And really what I am so enamored of Partner Plan Act and the work that Grace is doing is because you're bringing together Brockenbrenner's theory of ecological systems theory. You are literally bringing it together in 2020, and I'm just so excited about that. And you see how he said every system impacts the other system, and if we positively impact all of our systems, then we positively impact the child and the family. We don't have time to go through the Kindergarten Transition Advisory Committee report, but it is a great thing. It's in your handouts. There's a link to that I gave you. And basically what it is that our state legislator in 2017 realized that we needed to have a greater conversation about transitioning children in kindergarten. So there was a resolution that formed a committee. The committee studied the matter for a year, and they came out with a report in September of 2018. September of 2018. Here's their summary findings, talking again about alignment. You see, I pulled out strengthen cross-sector partnerships, and that et cetera there is where you can add on and add on and add on to whatever your community system or your partnership may be that you've put together. I want to introduce you, if you haven't already, looked at the Illinois Risk and Reach report. They did their whole report centered around the first 5 years of children's life. We know how important that is. They use these three domains: family stability, health, early care, and education to come up. Their purpose was to give a holistic view of how well the needs of young children are being met at a county level. This is what I want to get to before I close this out. The importance of, again, having a shared common definition. This is how they defined at risk. They took it off of children and family. This child is at risk, this family is at risk. Risk is situated in the environment and directly related to system flaws. And if we can find the flaw within the system, surely we can work towards resolving it. I have to think about the fact that as Brockenbrenner's ecological system and as Risk and Reach defines at risk being in the environment, certainly the environment and the ecological system has come crashing down on our family. So we'll be talking about that for such a long time. Take a screenshot of this. I do not believe I put this this whole breadth in your handouts. So this is how you get to the Illinois Risk and Reach report. The upcoming, when they opened up, you heard Grace talk about early childhood for professional learning. Right now, they are not doing any webinars. They're switching over to a new registration system. If you are interested in anything that they're going to be doing, you can email me through my website, and I'll make sure you get on their mailing list. Cindy Berry is the program director. Take a screenshot of that. They'll be announcing their upcoming webinars in July. And then lastly, again, I just want to share with you, please, contact me through my website, and I will make sure that the unanswered questions that we may have had, I'm looking at 12:24, and so I'm just for this last 60 seconds before I hand it back over to Ruby. We had these tech issues. I could hear as Ruby and I were trying to figure out what the problem was. I could hear, so I know that Grace was reading what was in the chat. Love those conversations. We did have to speed through some of this. This is just such important work, and it's such critical work now more than ever as we head into the resuming of classes for the fall of 2021, as we have our child care and our community-based partners are now resuming their face-to-face care of families and children. It's such an important conversation for us to have, and I don't want any stone to go unturned. So please, unanswered questions, wondering, anything that wasn't captured, contact me through my website. It'll directly come to me again once you prove you're not a robot, and I'll do the very best I can to make sure I address your website inquiry. With that, I do want to say thank you. I do want to wish everyone a peaceful, relaxing, and safe summer, and I will hand it back off to Ruby. You all can't see me, but I'm clapping and I'm thanking you for joining the conversation. And I'm thanking you so much for hanging in there with us while we worked out our technical difficulties, and really just for even coming to this virtual summit. Great, important work is being done. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor. Virtual round of applause for you. That was tough with the technical difficulties, but we made it through. So somebody asked about Dr. Taylor's website. Not only was it on the screen, but we also typed it into the chat box. Along the same lines, we want to share that we will be having an Engaging Families panel on June 23rd, and you can register at partnerplanact.org. And that registration link is also on the chat. And please, just a reminder, you're going to receive a follow-up email with materials and the evaluation link. Please make sure to complete it. And as an added incentive, we are raffling off several copies of So You Want to Talk About Race by our keynote speaker, Ijoma Olu, who will be on at 1:30. So the more evaluations you complete, the better your chances of winning. Thanks again very much. I hope you have a great rest of your day. See you at 1:30 for our keynote speech. Thank you.
So Ruby, are you still in the room?
Oh, sorry, you didn't hear me. I am here. We're making sure to copy the chat. Are you still there? No. Okay.